day by day with patience and care. The sound of Helena's first attempt at his name echoed in the quiet room, a sacred vibration that seemed to settle into the very foundations of the house, sealing their joy into the walls. He wrapped his arm around Gabrielle, pulling her closer, his lips brushing her temple in a kiss that was a vow in itself. They sat there, wrapped in the aftermath of celebration and the profound peace of a future finally claimed, watching their daughter sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in the rhythm of their new, shared life. The pie hung in the air between them, a promise of all the words yet to come, a symphony of firsts yet to be played in this kitchen that had become the heart of their world. Victor's tears were not of sadness, but of a profound, staggering gratitude that seemed to rewrite his very DNA. He, who had been taught that strength was a fortress of solitude, now found his greatest power in this vulnerability, in this circle of warmth made by a woman and a child. Gabrielle felt the shift in him, the final surrender of the man he had been to the man he was always meant to become. She turned her face into his shoulder, breathing in the scent of his cologne mixed with the faint, sweet trace of orange glaze from the cake. Her own heart felt too large for her chest, brimming with a love so fierce and protective it momentarily stole her breath. She had built a life on practicalities, on making do, on guarding her small family against disappointment. Now, she was learning to let down her own guards, to trust in the solid, unwavering presence of the man beside her. Helena sighed in her sleep, the tiny H pendant glinting softly at her throat in the low evening light, a perfect, miniature promise against her skin. The sight of it, of his family crest melted down and reborn into the symbol of pure, unadulterated love, sent another wave of emotion through Victor. He had never known a transaction more valuable. She said pie, he whispered, his voice husky with awe, as if saying it too loudly might break the spell. She did, Gabrielle confirmed, her own voice a soft murmur against his shirt. She's been practicing that poo sound for days. She was saving it for you. The simplicity of the statement, the idea that his daughter had been holding onto a gift for him, undid him completely. He pressed his face into her hair, holding her tighter. The silence that enveloped them again was not empty. It was layered with the echoes of laughter, the ghost of guitar strings, the lingering sweetness of celebration, and the bright, shining potential of the word pie. Later, he helped her to her feet, his hand lingering on the small of her back as they moved through the quiet house. They checked on Helena one more time, her crib now a permanent fixture in the corner of their bedroom. The sight of it, of her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm, filled him with a sense of rightness so profound it was almost dizzying. In the adjoining bathroom, as Gabrielle brushed her teeth, Victor watched her in the mirror. She caught his gaze, her eyes smiling over the top of her toothbrush. He saw it then, not just the beautiful woman who had stormed his ordered life with grace and cake, but his partner, his future. The ring on her finger was not a brand of ownership, but a covenant, a silent testament to a choice they had both made. He came up behind her, circling his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. I meant every word, he said, his voice low. I want to participate. In the mornings, in the mess, in the nightmares and the scraped knees. I want to be the one she calls for. Gabrielle rinsed her mouth and turned in his arms, her hands coming to rest on his chest. You already are, she said, her gaze steady and sure. You have been. You just needed to hear it to believe it. She led him to bed not as a mistress to a powerful man, but as a woman to her equal, her love. The sheets were cool linen, but the space they created together was warm. They lay facing each other, talking in hushed tones about nothing and everything. The success of the party, the genuine joy on Claire's face, the way the gardener's little girl had fallen asleep in a pile of balloons. It was the domestic liturgy he had once dismissed as mundane, now revealed to him as the most luxurious of all comforts. He fell asleep with the scent of lavender and Gabrielle's shampoo on his pillow, and for the first time in his adult life, Victor Ashworth did not dream of boardrooms or stock prices or legacy. He dreamed of a kitchen, always a kitchen, filled with light and the sound of a little girl trying to say his name, The morning after the celebration did not arrive with the blare of an alarm or the sharp ring of a telephone, but with the soft, determined pattering of small hands against the wooden bars of a crib. Victor stirred first, the new father's instinct already weaving itself into his subconscious. He opened his eyes to the pale, pre-dawn light filtering through the curtains, illuminating the room in a soft, pearlescent gray. For a moment, he simply lay there, listening to the sound, absorbing the profound novelty of it. This was not an interruption to his rest. It was the reason for it. He slipped from the bed, his movements quiet so as not to disturb Gabrielle, who slept with a faint smile on her lips, one hand curled under her cheek. He crossed the room and looked down into the crib. Helena beamed up at him, her eyes bright and clear, a drool-dampened rabbit clutched in one fist. She raised her arms immediately in silent demand. "Good morning, little one," he whispered, his voice still rough with sleep. He lifted her, the familiar weight of her small body against his chest feeling like the most natural thing in the world. The tiny H pendant was cool against his skin. She babbled softly, a series of happy, nonsensical sounds that were more beautiful to him than any concerto. He carried her downstairs, the grand staircase silent under his bare feet. The mansion was still, holding its breath, the remnants of yesterday's party. A stray balloon caught in a doorway, the faint, sweet smell of cake lingering in the air, like cherished memories already being folded into its history. In the kitchen, he prepared her bottle with a focused precision he usually reserved for multimillion-dollar contracts. The ritual of warming the milk, testing the temperature on his wrist, felt like a sacred act. He settled into the large, upholstered armchair he'd recently moved into the corner of the kitchen for this exact purpose, cradling Helena in the crook of his arm. She drank greedily, her eyes locked on his, full of a trust so absolute it humbled him. This was how Gabrielle found them an hour later. She paused in the doorway, wrapped in his discarded robe, her hair a sleep-tousled cascade over her shoulders. She watched them, her heart swelling at the sight. The powerful, formidable Victor Ashworth, his hair mussed, his jaw dark with stubble, utterly captivated by the baby in his arms. The morning sun, now stronger, caught the simple band on her finger, making it gleam. "I see the early shift is in capable hands," she said softly, her voice like music in the quiet room. Victor looked up, a smile, a true, unguarded, easy smile, transforming his face. "We were just discussing the day's agenda, weren't we, ma petite?" He looked down at Helena, who had finished her bottle and was now contentedly chewing on the collar of his pajamas. Her points were particularly insightful. Gabrielle crossed the room, bending down to press a kiss to his forehead, then one to Helena's. "I have no doubt," she breathed in the scene, the smell of warm milk, clean baby, and him. "This is my favorite sight," she murmured. "My whole world, right here in this kitchen." He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, the two rings, the old world and the new, clicking softly together. "Mine too." The day unfolded not as a series of scheduled events, but as a gentle, meandering river of small moments. They made breakfast together, Victor clumsily attempting pancakes under Gabrielle's affectionate instruction. Helena enthroned in her high chair, banging a spoon on the tray in enthusiastic, if rhythmically challenged, approval. Flour dusted the countertops. Syrup made a tiny, sticky puddle on the floor, and laughter, easy and unforced, filled the air. It was a beautiful, glorious mess. Victor looked at it all, the mess, the noise, the joy, and felt a peace so deep it was akin to reverence. This was the cost of dehumanizing he had quoted in the boardroom, and here was its radiant, priceless opposite, the profound value of being truly, completely human. Later, as Helena napped, they sat together on the sun-drenched terrace, fingers intertwined, not speaking, simply being. The lavender bushes he'd planted swayed gently in the breeze, and Victor knew, with a certainty that settled deep into his bones, that no deal he had ever brokered, no acquisition he had ever masterminded, could ever come close to the magnitude of this victory. He had not just built a family. He had finally come home. The peace of the afternoon was a tangible thing, a golden haze that settled over the terrace and the garden beyond. Victor's thumb traced idle circles on the back of Gabrielle's hand, a silent language that spoke of contentment deeper than words. He watched a bee dance from one lavender spike to another, its industrious hum a part of the day's quiet symphony. This, he thought, was the true currency of a life well lived. Not the zeros on a balance sheet, but the weight of a loved one's hand in yours, the scent of earth and flowers on the warm air, the profound certainty of belonging. His phone, silent and forgotten on the wrought iron table, vibrated with a soft, insistent buzz. It was a sound from another world, a ghost of his old life tapping at the window of this new one. He felt Gabrielle's fingers tense almost imperceptibly within his. He made no move to answer it, his gaze still fixed on the lavender, on the way the light gilded the edges of each tiny purple blossom. "Aren't you going to get that?" Gabrielle asked, her voice soft, without judgment. She understood the weight of that device, the countless crises it had heralded. "No," he said, the word simple and final. "There is nothing on that phone that is more important than this moment. Than you." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, right beside the new, simple band that symbolized a future he was only just beginning to deserve. The phone fell silent, then buzzed again a moment later. A single, short alert this time. A text. Against his better judgment, a habit of a lifetime, he glanced at the screen. It was from his executive assistant, Ethan. "The article is live. Respectful. Surprisingly so. Thought you should know." A faint ripple of tension returned to his shoulders. Gabrielle saw it, her eyes searching his. "Victor, it's nothing," he said. But the spell was slightly broken. The outside world, with its opinions and its headlines, had found a crack in their sanctuary. He sighed, picking up the phone. "It's about the board meeting." The press picked up the story about the daycare initiative. He opened the link Ethan had sent. He expected the usual corporate jargon, a dry recap of financial decisions. Or worse, a cynical piece questioning his motives, dissecting the photo of a man holding a child. As Bianca had so coldly put it, what he saw instead made his breath catch. The headline was simple: Ashworth's Choice. How a corporate titan is redefining strength. The lead photo was not of a boardroom or a stock ticker. It was the candid shot Gabrielle had sent him days ago. Helena, fast asleep on the colorful rug of the new nap room, her fist clenched in that courageous sleep, a single blurry toy block beside her. The article spoke not of shareholder value, but of human value. It quoted his cost of dehumanizing line, and instead of mocking it, the writer praised its stark moral clarity. It mentioned the increased productivity metrics only in passing, focusing instead on testimonials from junior employees. A new mother, a single father, who spoke of the crushing relief of knowing their children were safe and close by. And then, the article turned to the source. It mentioned Gabrielle, not by name, but as the remarkable pastry chef whose quiet strength and belief in the sanctity of home clearly inspired a paradigm shift. It quoted Claire's simple, profound wisdom. When a home fits in the hands of the person who cleans it, everything stays in place, even the clock. He read it aloud to Gabrielle, his voice growing thicker with each word. When he finished, she was silent, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking out at the garden, at their future. "They see it," she whispered, amazed. "They actually see it. They understand it's not a publicity stunt. They see you," he corrected, his voice rough with emotion. He put the phone down, screen facing the table, banishing the outside world once more. "They see the truth you brought into this house, into me." He cupped her face, turning her gaze to his. This is the legacy I want. Not skyscrapers with my name on them. A single, quiet revolution that started with a slice of orange cake." He leaned forward and kissed her then, not with the frantic passion of their first kisses, but with a slow, deep certainty that tasted of promise and chamomile tea and a future written not in headlines, but in the small, daily acts of love. It was a kiss that sealed their victory, not over a board of directors, but over the ghosts of their pasts. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in strokes of rose and amber, Victor knew that every choice, every heartbreak, every risk, had been worth it to lead him to this terrace, to this woman, to this life that was finally, authentically his own. The kiss lingered, a soft, sealing promise against her lips that seemed to draw the golden light of the evening right into the core of him. When he finally drew back, resting his forehead against hers, the world had narrowed to this single, perfect point. The whisper of their shared breath, the scent of her skin, the profound rightness that hummed between them. The article, the phone, the outside world. It all faded into a distant murmur, irrelevant against the roaring truth of this connection. It was in this hushed, sacred space that a new sound emerged. Not the demanding cry of hunger or the fussy whimper of tiredness, but a deliberate, experimental series of sounds from the monitor on the table. A coo, a gurgle, and then, clear as a bell in the quiet afternoon, "Papa." The word hung in the air, perfectly formed, undeniable. Victor froze. His eyes, which had been closed, flew open, locking with Gabrielle's. He saw his own stunned disbelief reflected in her gaze, which quickly melted into radiant, awestruck joy. "Did you?" he breathed, the words barely audible. A wide, triumphant smile broke across Gabrielle's face. "I heard it." They moved as one, a silent, urgent agreement passing between them. He stood, pulling her up with him, their hands still clasped tightly. They didn't run, but their steps were swift and sure as they moved through the quiet house, drawn by the magnetic pull of that miraculous sound. They paused at the doorway of the bedroom. Helena was standing, clutching the bars of her crib, her little body swaying with the effort. She saw them, her face lighting up with a triumphant, gummy smile. She bounced on her sturdy little legs. "Papa," she declared, this time with even more confidence, pointing a chubby finger directly at him. The air left Victor's lungs in a rush. It was a physical blow, a wave of emotion so powerful it buckled his knees. He stumbled forward, catching himself on the edge of the crib, his vision blurring. A sob, raw and entirely unrestrained, broke from his chest. He, Victor Ashworth, who had faced down hostile takeovers and merciless investors without flinching, was brought to his knees by a single perfect word from his daughter. He reached into the crib, his hands trembling, and lifted her high into the air. She squealed with delight, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. He brought her down, clutching her to his chest, burying his face in the soft, sweet-smelling curve of her neck. He felt her small, sturdy heartbeat against his own, a frantic, happy rhythm that seemed to say, "Papa, Papa, Papa." Gabrielle wrapped her arms around them both, her own tears wet against his shoulder, her body shaking with silent, happy sobs. She pressed kisses to his back, to Helena's head, her hands rubbing comforting circles between his shoulder blades as he wept openly, great, heaving sobs of release and overwhelming love. He was crying for the father he'd never had, for the cold, silent house of his childhood, for the decades he'd spent believing he was unworthy of a love this pure, this simple. He was crying for the miraculous, winding path that had led him here, to this moment, to this child who had chosen her name for him. He was crying from the sheer, staggering privilege of it all. When his tears finally subsided, leaving him spent and hollowed out yet more whole than he had ever been, he loosened his grip just enough to look at Helena. She was studying his wet face with serious, curious eyes, one little hand reaching up to pat his cheek. "Papa," she said softly, as if comforting him. A laugh, watery and broken, escaped him. "Yes, my love," he whispered, his voice ravaged by emotion. "I'm here. Papa's here." He looked over Helena's head at Gabrielle, her face streaked with tears but illuminated by a love so fierce it stole his breath anew. In her eyes he saw the same cataclysmic shift, the same understanding that their world had just irrevocably, beautifully changed its axis. "She named you," Gabrielle whispered, her voice thick with wonder. She looked at you and she named you. He could only nod, pulling her into the circle of his arms, holding his entire world against his heart. The three of them stood there, wrapped in the fading light of the evening, a new word, Papa, echoing in the silence, not as a question, but as the most profound and definitive statement of their future. It was the final thread, pulled through the needle of their shared heart, stitching them together for good. The echo of that single, world-altering word seemed to linger in the room, a vibration that had permanently changed its atmosphere. Victor held them, his daughter and the woman who had given her to him, until his arms ached with the sweetest fatigue he had ever known. Helena, having delivered her seismic pronouncement, grew heavy-lidded and serene, her head drooping onto his shoulder with the absolute trust of one who has found her anchor in the storm of a confusing new world. He laid her back in her crib with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics, his fingers lingering for a moment on her back, feeling the gentle rise and fall of her breath. She was asleep almost instantly, a small, peaceful conqueror who had felled a giant with a single syllable. He and Gabrielle retreated on silent feet, their hands finding each other instinctively once they were in the hall. They didn't go far, sinking onto the top step of the grand staircase, shoulders pressed together, looking out at the vast, quiet emptiness of the entrance hall below. The grandeur of the space felt different now, not a monument to cold wealth, but a vast canvas waiting to be filled with the vibrant, messy art of their life together. Victor's breath was still unsteady. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the damp tracks of his tears. "I never," he began, his voice a hoarse scrape. He shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. "I never knew. I never dreamed. I never thought I could have this." Gabrielle leaned her head against his shoulder. "I know," she said, because she did. She understood the barren landscape of his past in a way no one else ever had. She had seen the frost in him, and she had brought the sun. She's been working up to it. The P sound was her favorite. "I thought it might be for rabbit or bottle, but it was for you. It was always for you." He turned his head, pressing his lips to her hair. "It's because of you. All of this. You made this house a home. You made me a father worth naming." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen across the marble floor below, each lost in the immensity of the moment. The article, the boardroom, the ring, the cake. It had all been a prelude to this. This was the core of it all. This raw, unvarnished love. Later, as true dusk settled, painting the sky a deep indigo, Victor felt a new stillness settle within him. The emotional tempest had passed, leaving behind a clarity so sharp it was almost painful. He looked at Gabrielle, her profile etched against the window at the end of the hall. "I want to sell it," he said, his voice quiet but firm, no trace of the earlier upheaval in it. Gabrielle turned to him, her brow furrowed in gentle confusion. "Sell what, my love?" "This." He gestured not just to the hall, but to the entire mansion, the grounds, the history. All of it. The safe, the chandeliers, the silent rooms that echo with the wrong kind of past. This was never a home. It was a museum to a legacy I don't want to inherit anymore. Her eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt, her hand tightening around his. "I don't want Helena learning to walk on marble that's too cold and too hard to fall on," he continued, his gaze intense, burning with a new purpose. "I don't want her childhood memories to be of rooms she was told not to touch anything in. I want a home with a garden she can get muddy in, with a kitchen that's always warm and smells of whatever you're baking, with walls that have crayon marks on them and a tree in the yard with a swing. I want a home that fits in our hands." He was quoting Claire, quoting Gabrielle, building his new manifesto from the wisdom of the women who had saved him. "This?" He looked around, not with disdain, but with a final, decisive detachment. "This can become a foundation, a museum for modern art, perhaps, or a center for early childhood development, a proper, large-scale version of our nap room. Something that gives back. Something that finally does some good with all this cold stone." He finally looked back at her, his expression open, vulnerable, awaiting her judgment. This was her life, too. Her daughter's life. "What do you think?" Tears welled in Gabrielle's eyes again, but these were tears of a profound, soaring pride. She saw not a man running from his past, but a man courageously building a future from the ground up, choosing every brick himself. She saw the father who wanted a swing set more than a satellite office, the partner who valued warmth over wealth. She brought his hand to her lips and kissed his palm, the place where their future was written. "I think," she said, her voice steady and sure, "that I fell in love with the man who kneeled on a kitchen floor to play with my daughter, and I would follow that man anywhere, even to a house with crayon marks on the walls." A smile, breathtaking in its relief and joy, broke across his face. In that moment, under the dim light of the hallway, with their sleeping daughter nearby, Victor Ashworth didn't just feel like he had found a family. He felt, for the first time, like he had truly found himself. And he knew, with a certainty that resonated in his very soul, that his greatest legacy would never be a building, but the echo of a single word, whispered in the warm, messy, beautiful home they would build together: Papa. The decision, once spoken, seemed to unlock a new energy within them, a shared purpose that was both exhilarating and humbling. The grandeur of the mansion no longer felt imposing. It felt like a shell, its true value now lying in the potential of what its sale could build for them, for others. They sat on the step until the last of the twilight faded into a velvety, star-dusted night, talking in hushed, eager tones. They spoke not of square footage or market values, but of bay windows for reading nooks, of a porch for summer evenings, of a kitchen garden where Helena could learn the taste of sun-warmed tomatoes picked right from the vine. It was a dream spun from moonlight and hope, and it felt more solid to Victor than any contract he had ever signed. The following days were a study in beautiful contrasts. The opulent mansion became the backdrop for their most ordinary, and therefore most extraordinary moments. Victor conducted high-stakes merger calls from the kitchen table, his bare feet tucked under Gabrielle's chair, the soft hum of the dishwasher a more comforting sound than any boardroom fanfare. He'd break from analyzing complex data streams to carefully spoon pureed pears into Helena's eager mouth, catching the drips with a tenderness that made Gabrielle's heart ache. He was a man seamlessly integrating the two halves of his soul. One afternoon, he disappeared into his study, the room that had once been the sanctum of his corporate self. But he didn't emerge with spreadsheets. He came out with a large, leather-bound sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils he hadn't touched since his university days. "What's all this?" Gabrielle asked, looking up from where she was folding a tiny stack of Helena's sleepers. "Blueprints," he said, a boyish excitement in his eyes. He spread the book open on the kitchen island. They weren't architectural drawings, but rather feeling rendered in lines and shadows. A sweeping, fluid sketch of a porch swing. A detailed, loving cross-section of a kitchen, with a vast, well-loved oven and a deep farmhouse sink. A child's room with a window seat looking out onto the branches of a large tree. He pointed to a corner of the kitchen drawing. "Here, this is where the recipe notebook will live. Always open, always waiting." Gabrielle traced the lines with her finger, her vision blurring. He wasn't just planning a house. He was drawing a love letter to their future. He was designing a home based entirely on the language they had built together: warmth, safety, light, and the sacred mess of living. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's a start," he corrected, pulling her close. "We'll find the right place and we'll build it together." Every step. The change in him was infectious. The entire household seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, as if the walls themselves were relaxing. Mrs. Louise began humming old French love songs while polishing the silver, her movements lighter. The gardener, upon overhearing their plans, brought Victor a folder of landscaping ideas for a proper family garden, with sections for butterflies and sturdy, child-friendly plants. Even the corporate world saw the shift. The article had done more than generate positive press. It had subtly recalibrated the company's culture. Employees stood a little taller. There was a new, genuine warmth in the greetings Victor received when he did go into the office. The pilot daycare, now buzzing with life and the happy chaos of children, had become the heart of the building, its influence radiating outward, softening edges and reminding everyone of the lives they were working to build, not just the deals they were closing. Bianca had resigned quietly, her departure noted with a brief, professional memo. Victor felt a pang of something akin to nostalgia, but not regret. Their paths had diverged, and he could only wish her well on her own journey, hoping she would find a mold that fit her own heart. Weeks melted into a month, then two. The first birthday balloons were replaced by the budding leaves of early summer. Helena was a whirlwind of discovery, her world expanding from crawling to cautious, triumphant steps held tightly to her parents' fingers. Her vocabulary grew, a delightful jumble of words, but Papa remained her anchor, her favorite, most cherished word, used to summon him for play, for comfort, for the sheer joy of saying it. One evening, after Helena was asleep and the house was quiet, Victor led Gabrielle outside into the moonlit garden. The lavender was in full, fragrant bloom, a sea of silver and purple under the starry sky. He stopped in the very spot where he had once knelt to play with a baby he didn't yet know would become his entire world. He took both of her hands in his. The simple band on her finger was cool against his skin. "I have something for you," he said, his voice low and intimate in the stillness. "It's not a deed to a new house, not yet, but it's the promise of one." From his pocket, he drew not a jewelry box, but a simple, folded piece of vellum. He opened it carefully. It was the sketch of the kitchen from his book, but he had redrawn it, refining the lines, adding more detail. And at the bottom, in his strong, precise script, he had written a title, "The Blueprint of Our Beginning." And beneath that, a single line, "Every recipe created here will be seasoned with love." Tears, happy and free, streamed down Gabrielle's face. It was the most romantic, most luxurious gift she had ever received. It held no monetary value and yet was priceless. It was a map of a dream they would navigate together. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she breathed, clutching the paper to her heart. He smiled, pulling her into his arms, their bodies swaying slightly in the fragrant darkness. "We'll find it," he promised, his lips against her hair. "We'll find the place where our clocks can finally truly keep time." And as they stood there, wrapped in the promise of the future and the scent of blooming lavender, the grand, silent mansion behind them felt not like a prison of the past, but simply like a chapter that was gently, gratefully, coming to a close. The best chapters, they both knew, were yet to be written. The vellum blueprint, now slightly softened from being pressed against Gabrielle's heart, found its place of honor on the kitchen island, held down by a small, smooth stone Helena had presented to Victor during a walk in the garden. It became the focal point of their days, a tangible touchstone for their shared dream. They would often find themselves pausing beside it, a finger tracing the lines of the imagined porch or the deep, welcoming sink, adding their own notes in the margins in different colored inks. "Wider sill for herb pots," Gabrielle wrote. "Lower cabinet here for toy storage," Victor added. This collaborative act of building their future on paper was a luxury more profound than any Victor had ever known. It was a quiet rebellion against the life he'd been handed, a deliberate, joyful construction of the one he was choosing. The process of disentangling himself from the mansion began not with a cold-hearted liquidation, but with a series of thoughtful, almost ceremonial goodbyes. He started in the vast, formal dining room, a space that had hosted countless perfunctory meals. He and Gabrielle spent an afternoon carefully wrapping the antique china, the heavy silver, the cut crystal goblets that had never known the touch of a child's sticky fingers. "These shouldn't be locked in a crate somewhere," Victor mused, holding a delicate, gold-rimmed plate up to the light. "They should be used. They should have gravy spilled on them." Gabrielle, her hands wrapped around a champagne flute, smiled. "Perhaps they can. At the foundation." His eyes lit up. It was the perfect solution. The idea for the Ashworth Foundation for Early Childhood had taken root, and now it began to sprout details. The mansion wouldn't just be sold. Its contents would seed its new purpose. The dining room could host fundraising galas where donors ate from this very china, their contributions funding the very nap rooms and parental support programs the foundation would champion. The exquisite, and used silver would serve meals to children and families who would see it not as a symbol of cold wealth, but of warm generosity. The act of packing became an act of transformation. Each item they wrapped was no longer a relic of a stifling past, but a tool for a compassionate future. One rainy afternoon, Victor ventured into the wing that had been his parents'. The air was still and carried the faint scent of faded perfume and old polish. He stood for a long moment in the doorway of his father's dressing room, taking in the rows of impeccably tailored suits, the shelves of handmade shoes. These were the trappings of a man who built fortresses, not homes. He didn't feel anger or even sadness. He felt a distant, quiet pity. He selected a single silver cufflink from a velvet tray, a simple, elegant piece, as a token, a reminder of where he came from, but not who he had to be. The rest, he decided, would be sold at auction. The proceeds funneled directly into the foundation's startup fund. It felt like a final, necessary alchemy, turning the cold armor of his inheritance into a shield for other, more vulnerable families. He found Gabrielle in the library, curled in a large armchair with Helena dozing on her chest. She was reading from a book of poetry, her voice a soft murmur that wove through the sound of the rain against the windows. The scene was so profoundly peaceful, so diametrically opposed to the stiff, silent library of his youth, that it cemented his resolve. He crossed the room and knelt beside the chair, his hand coming to rest on Helena's sleeping back. He looked up at Gabrielle, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a single lamp. "I found it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Her reading stopped. She looked down at him, her eyes questioning. "The new house. The realtor just sent the listing. It's everything we drew." His heart was pounding with a nervous, giddy excitement. "It's not a mansion. It's a home. It has the porch, the tree for the swing, the kitchen with the big window. It's waiting for us." A slow, radiant smile spread across Gabrielle's face, a mirror of his own hope. She didn't ask for the address or the price. She simply reached out and cupped his cheek, her thumb stroking his skin. "Then it's ours," she said, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. And in that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of a silent, unloved past, with the warm weight of his future sleeping in his lover's arms, Victor knew it was. The journey wasn't about escaping his history, but about honoring it by building its opposite. He was no longer the heir to a cold fortune. He was the architect of a warm future, and every line on their vellum blueprint was a declaration of love. The rain softened to a gentle drizzle, tapping a soothing rhythm against the library windows as if blessing their decision. Victor remained on his knees, his forehead resting against the arm of Gabrielle's chair, the three of them enclosed in a bubble of quiet certainty. The listing on his phone, with its pictures of a sun-drenched porch and a kitchen with a scarred wooden table, felt more like a homecoming notice than a real estate alert. The following week was a whirlwind of a different, exhilarating kind. They visited the house not as prospective buyers, but as pilgrims arriving at a destined shrine. It was nestled on the edge of the city, where the streets grew quieter and the gardens larger. It was a sturdy, welcoming structure of warm brick and climbing ivy, nothing like the imposing stone facade of the mansion. It was, as Victor had said, everything they had drawn. The moment Gabrielle stepped into the kitchen, she knew. She walked directly to the large, north-facing window overlooking a wild, rambling garden. "This is where the light will be best for the cake icing," she said, her voice full of wonder. She turned to see Victor watching her, Helena balanced on his hip, both of them staring at her as if she were the one conjuring the magic. Helena, sensing the significance, wriggled to be put down. Victor set her on the wide plank wooden floor, and she immediately began a slow, triumphant toddle across the empty room, her happy babble echoing in the space that was already, undeniably, theirs. The offer was made and accepted within the day. The sale of the mansion, to Victor's quiet amusement, proceeded with a speed that spoke of its coveted address and the allure of the Ashworth name. But he was no longer selling a name, he was gifting a future. The negotiations were handled by his lawyers, the proceeds meticulously divided to fully endow the foundation and secure their new beginning. He felt a profound sense of rightness, a clean, surgical severance from a weight he had carried for a lifetime. The move was not a somber exodus but a joyful exorcism. They took only what truly mattered: their clothes, Gabrielle's recipe books and mixer, Victor's sketchbook and a few select books, Helena's toys and crib. The rest, the art, the antiques, the cold, beautiful relics, were catalogued for the foundation or auction, each item shedding its personal history to become part of a greater, more generous story. Their last night in the mansion was spent in the only room that had ever truly felt like theirs: the kitchen. They ate a simple meal of bread, cheese, and fruit on the island, the vast house around them silent and empty, already feeling like a museum after hours. "Are you sad to leave?" Gabrielle asked, her fingers laced with his. Victor looked around. He saw the spot where he had first truly seen her, covered in flour and fierce determination. He saw the place where Helena had taken her first steps. He saw the chair where he had held her for her first bottle at dawn. "No," he said, and it was the truth. "This kitchen gave us our start. It gave us each other. It gave me Papa. I will love it forever for that. But a chapter can be cherished without having to be reread endlessly. Our story needs new walls." The next morning, under a sky of pristine blue, they performed one final act. Victor carried the small, smooth stone Helena had given him. Gabrielle held a trowel. In the corner of the garden, near the lavender bushes he had planted, they dug a small, deep hole. "What are we putting in?" Gabrielle asked softly. Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out the single silver cufflink he had kept from his father's collection. It glinted, cold and sharp in the sunlight. Then he reached for her hand, and the simple, warm band of her engagement ring touched the cold metal. "We're burying the ghost of the man I was supposed to be," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're leaving him here, in the earth with the lavender. This is where he belongs, not with us." Together, they placed the cufflink in the earth and covered it over, patting the soil down firmly. It was a burial, a blessing, and a benediction all at once. They stood, hand in hand, looking back at the grand, empty house one last time. It looked exactly like what it was: a beautiful empty shell. Their hearts, their lives, their future, were already miles away, waiting for them in a home with a porch swing and a kitchen that promised a lifetime of warm, orange-scented afternoons. They turned their backs on the past and walked toward their car and their new life without a single glance back. The car did not feel like an escape vehicle, but a vessel carrying them toward a promised shore. Helena, sensing the seismic shift in her world, fell asleep almost instantly in her car seat. Her trusted rabbit clutched in a loose grip, her chest rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of absolute security. Victor drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on Gabrielle's thigh, a constant, grounding connection. They didn't speak much, the silence between them a comfortable, shared language of anticipation and quiet joy. When they pulled into the gravel drive of the new house, the late morning sun gilded the brick and made the windows sparkle like eyes winking in welcome. The ivy seemed to tremble in the gentle breeze, as if applauding their arrival. It was not a grand reveal, but a soft, welcoming embrace. The door was solid, painted a cheerful, fresh blue. Victor fitted the new, heavy key into the lock. The click of the mechanism was not just the sound of a door opening. It was the sound of a lock disengaging from the past. He pushed it open and, in a gesture that felt instinctive and right, he turned to Gabrielle. "Carry me over the threshold?" he asked, a playful, tender light in his eyes. She laughed, a sound of pure, unburdened delight that echoed in the empty hallway. "I think I might throw my back out, mon amour. Then we'll go in together," he said, his voice soft. He took her hand and, with his other arm cradling a still sleeping Helena, they stepped across the threshold together, as equals, as partners, entering their future side by side. The emptiness of the house was not a void, but a canvas. Their footsteps echoed on the bare wood floors, a satisfying sound that spoke of potential. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dancing dust motes that looked like flecks of gold. They walked through the rooms slowly, their voices hushed, not out of reverence for the past, but in awe of the future they would paint onto these blank walls. Helena woke up, blinking in the new light. Victor set her down in the middle of the living room. She took a few wobbly steps on the unfamiliar floor, then plopped down with a soft thud, patting the wood with her palms as if testing its worth. She looked up at them and grinned, a silent seal of approval. The first thing they unpacked was not a box of essentials, but a picnic basket Gabrielle had prepared. They sat on a blanket in the middle of the empty living room, eating sandwiches and strawberries, their laughter bouncing off the bare walls, christening the space with joy. It was the most luxurious meal of Victor's life. The afternoons and days that followed were a symphony of small, perfect firsts. The first time the new oven was turned on, to bake not a test run, but a celebratory, slightly lopsided chocolate cake. The first bath given to Helena in the deep, clawfoot tub, her squeals of delight echoing off the tiled walls. The first evening spent on the porch, the three of them squeezed onto the swing Victor had insisted on assembling first, watching fireflies blink to life in the gathering dusk. Victor's sketchbook began to fill not with dreams, but with reality. He drew Gabrielle, bathed in the light of their new kitchen window, her brow furrowed in concentration as she kneaded dough. He sketched Helena, fast asleep in a patch of sun on the living room rug, her rabbit tucked under her arm. He drew the view from the porch swing, the tree that would soon hold a swing of its own. One evening, he came home from a final meeting at the foundation, now fully established in the mansion, its new director already buzzing with plans for the first community programs. He found the house filled with the rich, savory scent of a slow-cooked stew. Gabrielle was in the kitchen, but she wasn't alone. Claire was there, sipping a glass of wine at the island, while Mrs. Louise chopped vegetables with a familiar efficiency. Helena was in her high chair, banging a spoon in time to the music playing from a small wireless speaker. Victor stopped in the doorway, his heart swelling at the sight. This was it. This was the dream made manifest. The warmth, the noise, the community, the feeling of a home that fit in their hands. Claire saw him first. There he is, the man who traded marble for maple, she said, her eyes twinkling. The best trade I ever made, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He walked over to Gabrielle, wrapping his arms around her from behind and burying his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of her, of the stew of home. Mrs. Louise looked up, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She gave a brisk, satisfied nod. The light is better in here for cooking, she declared, as if passing the final, most important judgment. And it was. The light was better. The air was better. The life was better. As Victor stood there, surrounded by the women who had built him anew, listening to his daughter's happy noise, he knew that every choice, every risk, every tear, had been worth it. He had not just found a family. He had built a sanctuary, and its foundation was laid, brick by brick, with love at the end. Thanks for staying till the end. Show your love with a like, subscribe, and comment if you want the next part.